All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation portion. And we'll have time after the presentation to go back and look at the boards and ask some more specific questions, especially after you see some of the details that Jason with SmithGroup is going to share. So first of all, my name is Sean Leininger. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the city. I saw we have a few people from our city staff team here in the background. If you could just raise your hand. We have representatives from Public Works, Planning Department. We also have several elected officials here in the audience here with us today. So thank you, everybody, for coming. And first of all, thank you all for coming too. We know there's a lot of things you can do with your time. You chose to come here tonight, especially on a beautiful night like tonight in February 20, what is today, 27th? Yes. Yeah, 27th. You don't get too many of these days, and you came here to help us and help provide your feedback into this project and contribute to your community. So thank you so much. So really tonight, for those who have been following this process over the last 18 months, this is the culmination of 18 months of analyzing Lakewood Park and the waterfront, reviewing thousands of comments that we received through meetings like this. This is our third public meeting, online surveys and other data points that we put together, developing a series of concept plans that ultimately then, the purpose of this evening is to share where we are with a preferred concept for waterfront access at Lakewood Park. So tonight we're going to have Jason Stanglin with SmithGroup. He's going to walk you through kind of a lot of the background on how we got here. I think it's important too to remember that this is not a new idea for Lakewood Park. The idea of a pier, the idea of waterfront access has always been part of Lakewood Park's master plan, which was adopted 20 years ago. You can access that on our website if you want to learn more about those original ideas and those visions. We've continued to implement that over the years, most recently with the Foster Pool improvements that were completed last year before the pool opened. So this is a continuation of that idea. What this really represents is kind of the current idea. We have a lot of work to go from here. There is not funding set aside to move forward with design and construction of this. What happens from here is once we have a concept plan, we now have to go into our capital improvement programming and plan and prioritize for this, along with all of the other improvements that the city has from roads, parks, sewer, water, all of those things. And we go through and prioritize that every year, and we look out 5 years for planning. So still a lot of work to do. This is an important step. This is a big step. But here I'll hand it over to Jason. We'll walk through, and again, we'll have time for questions here at the end. But thank you, everybody, for coming.
All right, thanks, Sean. Okay, I'm Jason, as he said. Michelle's with me from our team. We're gonna go through sort of a formal piece here, and then we're gonna kind of break apart, and people can ask some detailed questions. If there's some questions at the end that are more globally relevant, feel free to ask those. But I'm gonna try and work through some of the history of how we got here, and then we'll break apart and answer some more questions. So I don't do well tethered to one area. This is sort of a joke, but sort of actually true. My dad's a minister, so like going out this way, everybody sits in back. Like I'm much more comfortable there, but I'm going to try and stick here so that everybody can hear me. All right. So we're going to go through sort of the background of how we got here. That includes public engagement, the first two meetings, and sort of what we heard. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the plan itself. And what's important about this is that we all are going to hear different things when we all stand around individually. But it's important that we all hear the same thing, and then we can evaluate, do I like that or don't I like that? And so I want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to at least understand the same and have the same baseline, right? And then we'll talk a little bit about your perspective. And I had a great question, which I'll hit on a little bit, about the central staircase, and should they go down all the way or shouldn't they go all the way? And we'll get into that. Anyway, all right. Where this started was back before time, and the city had a concept of expanding access. And this debate about what access is really interesting to me. Is it proximity? Is it getting out over the water? Is it dipping my toes in the water? Or is it all of those things? Well, this is a concept that was, I would say, 90s, if I'm not mistaken. Early 2000s. I can't remember anything anymore. So let's go with that. Early 2000s, the idea was to extend a pier, basically where the stairs for the Solstice steps terminate. The Solstice steps weren't here at the time, though, right? So now that you have this great investment and this great amenity, how does this fit with that? And that was sort of the start of the whole project, was we want to expand access, increase lake access, but things have changed. So that was sort of where we came in, and the city asked us, what else could we do? And so we tested a bunch of different ideas. So you have a bunch of stuff out there, and what needs to work, it needs to work with it and improve upon it. You don't want to throw everything out, right? So you can't start over. So in the top image, you see the solstice steps, right? Much loved, much visited. I think 200, 400,000 people a year, something along those lines, come here for this great thing, to look at the sun going down, which is heartwarming, right? There's a sunrise component, which we'll talk about in a little bit too. Images on the lower portion, from left to right. The left are the wonderful jacks, which we all love, but is protecting and doing a pretty good job of stabilizing your former landfill, now Great Park. Next one over. That is the, I called it non-existent, non-usable, but used to be usable for about a year, fishing platform, but now you must stay off it because it's dangerous. Can we improve upon that and do something different? I mean, the idea of fishing, I'm not going to start that one right now with, are we going to allow it or not? But that's an interesting area, right? Something that I referred to as sort of a attractive nuisance, like you want to go there, right? This view on the third image, second from the right, that image shows you downtown Cleveland and all its splendor, right? And you kind of, what am I supposed to do here? There's a bench. There's somebody sitting there. I'm a mischievous kid. I just kind of go down here where I'm not supposed to go. Some of the neighbors expressed a concern about that. So can we formalize how that's used? Maybe increase the visibility of some things so that maybe some of the unwanted behavior doesn't happen so easily. And maybe take advantage of improving the visibility of downtown and the sunrise that does come with it. This gazebo on the right-hand side, a hotly contested item. The plans you'll see tonight include a space that could house a gazebo, but we're suggesting it be something different. I'll save that for later. But the idea that we could actually build on what exists and improve upon it, keep that in mind, right? So, you guys all know what this place is, right? There's a trail along the water, and then there's a trail up at top. I'm only going to highlight one thing probably on this one, maybe two. The thing I'm going to highlight is the bluff itself. And I'm going to actually walk up there because, again, I don't stand well. Right, so that patch, that blue line. So that patch and that blue line are really important because if I think about accessibility, and if I go back to all the comments, everybody's saying improve access from top of Bluff down to the lake. That little blue squiggle is that accessible route, which isn't actually accessible, universally accessible. We can build and improve upon that. And then the other piece I'm gonna debate in my own mind a lot, and I think you guys would all debate too, is there's a bluff here that has vegetation on it. Some of it's not native, some of it is. Some of it houses birds, some of it doesn't. Could we enhance that? What I heard, overwhelming majority of folks said, we want to make that we want to rely on nature, and we want to use things that are natural, and we want to enhance it. So our plans don't show trees. They could keep some of those trees. This is not the end of a process. This is sort of a beginning of another phase. So we'll debate that kind of moving forward if the city decides to advance. But that edge is something that we'll have to talk through. So I represent a lot of really cool nerd folks, which I consider myself part of, that are into coastal processes, right? And so if you're not numerically nerd folk type persons, but you actually have been out here, you know that there's big old waves that come to this location. From the west is the predominant direction, and they're big. And so if I start to look at that west side, you probably have a 9-foot wave climate that hits those concrete armor units and splash, right? You do have a less frequent, but still pretty significant wave out of the northeast that occasionally happens in the winter, when you may or may not have ice. We had no ice, of course. And that's pretty significant too. So when people talk about access and we talk about getting stuff over the water or toes in the water, we have to think about safety. We have to think about longevity and the improvements, as is illustrated by the fishing, the former fishing platform, right? And so we'll try to balance getting toes in the water and getting out over that with something that can be long-lived and can be something that can withstand the harsh conditions that you actually experience here, right? So first meeting, this is now 18 months ago, or 10 months ago on my mind. The first question was, what is this thing? What are we trying to build a pier that goes out perpendicular to the shoreline, or are we trying to just add some more seating? And then, are you modern? Not. What kind of aesthetic do you want? So a lot of this was focused on aesthetics. What kind of material choices? And overwhelmingly, what we heard was it needs to be natural. Natural materials, not contemporary in design. And so the magenta stuff that matches Michelle's coat, there's a synergy there, sort of is the highlight of things, right? So people said, out of 1,000 responses to the survey, which is hefty, by the way, good for you guys, make sure that the top of the bluff and the bottom of the bluff are connected, better than they are today. I heard things like make sure it's fully accessible, meaning it's universally accessible whether you broke your leg or whether you're 90, right? Or in a wheelchair or anything like that. Water access was critical, and then providing additional places and spaces where people could sit and linger. That was what we heard a lot of. And I highlight this access thing, because it was number one. What is access? Man, I don't know. We'll talk about that. So we had a survey after that had a lot of good feedback, and then that bottom comment is mine. What is access? I remember the whole group of our design team was like, what are we trying to do here? I'm not sure yet. And so we had to test that with 3 different ideas. So second meeting, we come and we present 3 ideas. And people hate some of them, right? I mean, that's how this is supposed to work, is we're testing like different divergent ideas. That's the whole premise, right? Tell me we're stupid. Go for it. I mean, that's where we're supposed to be. I can be completely ignorant at this point, right? So the upper left one is like building at the top of the bluff, exploring the idea of proximity, but not access. It's more visual access, right? Then we've got the upper right one, which is, next to it. We're doing stuff next to it. We're extending out over the stone that's along, or the concrete that's along the water, but we're not pushing out over the water. And then this third one, we're just going to go out over the water, right? And so I summarize it this way. View it, next to it, over it, and then the magenta down on the right-hand side is what we heard, which was get in it. So now we're trying to define, the whole design team's looking at it and we're saying, well, we thought we were just signing up for a pier. And now we're putting people in the water, in 9-foot wave climbing. We got to think about how we do this. So that sent us all back to the drawing board a little bit. What was good, though, is after that initial second meeting, we had more participation in a virtual setting. We had a bunch of people who commented on things, but the comments are similar to last time. They talk about top to bottom access and universal accessibility, but they did say some really important things that highlight where these concepts, or the concept that we call the preferred concept, kind of comes from or evolves from. Over the water, important. Okay, I heard that, and that's kind of what the bottom one is. That was heavily preferred, not just at the public meeting, but actually as a follow-up to that. People really liked that idea. We heard a really strong contingency of like, I'd like to fish. Again, I'm not going to debate that. That's a policy thing. But it does have implications on permits, so I will touch on that in a second. The other thing we heard was like, this place is great already. Like, let's make fewer, bigger moves and not sprinkle something everywhere. And so I think that's what we heard. And so you'll see the investments are in a couple key areas, right? The little fishy down at the bottom. So I said we come back to that. So filling in the lake for, let's say, a football stadium, just theoretically, probably not something you could do today. Okay, you can build that anywhere, right? Filling in the lake because I want to create a trail, maybe. In general, when I look at permitting from a state and federal level, they're going to look at one of the keys that I can use for getting things approved as permit is fishing. So in Euclid's case, it's a fishing pier. Now, Tim and a few of the guys fish at like 10 o'clock at night, which you're not supposed to do, but during the day, it's probably not heavy fishing. And so the question is, there's a management piece that you guys kind of have to decide as you move forward, but I think it also goes to how we justify investments that fill in along the lake edge too. So things that we can debate as we move forward with regulatory agencies, but at least sort of understand that that's one of the pieces we'll have to sort of walk a line on, right? Okay, so this is why we're here, right? Is the fun of like, well, you gave us a bunch of feedback and you didn't listen to me in this particular area, and okay, I won and I got what I wanted, and I have a direct staircase down. No, I don't have a direct staircase all the way down. I have a half staircase, right? So there's like, we're all going to find bits and pieces of things that we love, and bits and pieces of things that we hate. I can agree with that, but ultimately, it's going to be much better than what you have today, and ultimately provides you with a framework that, moving from today, guides future decisions. This is not the decision at the point where we tell Sean, yep, write the check. We're not there, right? That's not where we are at all. In fact, I can't even tell you some of the materiality on this. I can't tell you whether that's driven sheet pile that goes out around these cells or if it's a bin wall. I know nerdy language, but how these exactly are constructed, those are things that are going to have to be evaluated as you move forward. So what we're looking for tonight is sort of like the question of, like, the really good question that was asked today. Why does the staircase only go halfway down in the center, right? And so I have a reason for that. Maybe it's not the best reason, so we can talk about that. And as we move forward, we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff. How many trees do we remove? Do we keep them all? Do we plant more native vegetation that are benefiting pollinator species instead of maybe red-winged blackbirds, or somebody likes the red-winged blackbirds. I can't remember who it was. But, they're birds. That's great. So I'm going to go through like 3 big moves, and then we can talk about it in more detail later. The first one is sort of I'm going to call it in the middle, where the fishing platform used to exist, right? So what we heard was that thing is kind of dilapidated, not being used. Can we do something with it? It's an attractive nuisance, right? So the first thing was get people out touching the water, over or close to the water. And that was a pretty big, bold move, right? We can actually do that by pushing a structure out that actually replaces some of those concrete units. And actually we fill in with some stone along the edges and all that. But it actually doesn't have much impact on the lake bed from a permitting standpoint. It's actually pretty simple to permit. There's some green little nodes there. Do they have trees in it? Let's talk about it. I don't care. Does it have a shade shelter over the top? I don't care. Could. Those are details of things. The big idea is a space and place that you can actually get out to the water's edge, watch the sunset, sunrise. Maybe I can put 10 people out there and have a lunch, whatever, right? So that's one sort of occupiable space. It's at where, if I continue that set of stairs all the way down to lakefront, that's where you'd end up, right? So it's sort of at the center. On the right-hand side, we have a sort of this bigger move. And it's the biggest move, both dollars and cents-wise, but actually also from a design perspective over there. This idea is getting out over the water, getting people into deeper water for potential fishing, or certainly for viewing downtown. And so the other piece of that, in conjunction with that, is trying to then balance this idea of what does access and toes in the water mean, and how can we actually do that safely? So people paddle along the stretch right now, right? And then they don't really have a place to get out. So this is an opportunity where we have a cobble beach, not sand, cobble beach stuff that's this size to head size, right? And you can walk over it, but it's not intended to be like layout suntan beach, right? It's the idea that you can provide access and get down to the water safely or get out of the water safely. It's intending to sort of walk that line between promoting, but yet, or accommodating, but not promoting, knowing that people do it today. And so we have an opportunity to kind of create a space and a place that actually supports some of that, is safer, and then actually is something that people can actually visually see down into, right? And I'll come back down to this corner. This you see the right-hand side where the gazebo is not on this drawing. We were talking about something that's sculptural that might be more seating. A gazebo is great for a wedding, and it's great if you want 2 people to use it, but it is not going to allow multiple people to use it very much. So can we create something sculptural, maybe it swings, something like that, that look out over this? If you want the gazebo there, it's a space and a place that could house that without a problem. Below there's sort of these plinths. It's sort of, think about the solstice steps, but not as built. So each of the levels is 20 inches, roughly a seat height. And maybe it's 10 or 15 feet wide, and you could actually lay a blanket out on it. That's sort of what those components are on that side. It's intended to sort of play off of the solstice steps, but be something a little bit different, because this isn't going to have the same sort of use as the solstice steps. We know that. We're not trying to compete with it, but give somebody, I think, a different experience. I see yoga done on there. I might be more comfortable in a 10 or 12 foot zone rather than a tinier one where I might fall a little bit more easily. So I think maybe that's a nice counterpoint to that. Then the other bold move or bigger move here is really this access. And that access is a replacement for that switchback that provides accessible, truly ADA accessible walkway down there. And then we have a stair component to that, which could or doesn't have to go all the way down. We're showing it as stopping midway. And there's some reasons for that, which I can talk about around the table. Okay, some more images. Less Jason, more images. So the upper ones are just pulled directly from the model. They're not post-processed, which means they're not prettied up. Just helps you understand what it could look like, right? That's the central area, right? So on the right-hand side, where the lady in the white dress is, that ramps down and wraps around the corner, and then you have stairs that come down to that lower platform, right? Again, that the vegetation could actually be, we could have trees in there, ornamental trees or shade, whatever you want. But we have some seating edges, but we have 2 different levels there because we have some fall we can actually work with, but yet keep that deck and railing high enough that when the ice hits it, it survives. Just a couple other views of the pier and sort of that cobble beach area, right? Just showing you what it is. What is the shelter? How big should it be? Should it be pink, purple, polka dot? I don't care. Those are details that we can work through, right? How big should it be? What's the material? All things that we can work through. But again, the idea that when you're out on that pier looking at the sunrise, or maybe it's later in the day and you happen to be fishing, you have a place to get out of the sun. And so that's just an opportunity to provide that. So I think what's the right scale, we can work through those types of details. There's that cobble beach we talked about on the right-hand side, protected from the predominant wave direction out of the northwest and west, right?
Jason, can you expand on that? I've had at least 10 people ask questions about what are the wave heights, where is it coming from, why is that specifically there? I think there was enough people that asked that question that it might be worth it.
All right, nerd for a second with me. The length and the number of these, the size of that, tells you the frequency of the event occurring. The waves and the wind primarily come from the west. That's also where sediment transport and sand moves, but neither here nor there. But it's nearly twice the size of what comes out of the northeast in terms of frequency, meaning the bigger bars. the red and sort of that burgundy color, sure. You can see there's a lot more of the orange, red, burgundy, which are the highest waves. They're coming out of the west. And so I have a huge wave smacking that west face of the concrete units. And so we're trying to find a space and a place where we can actually provide enough shelter that we can actually have a cobble beach and have some level of access, because this is a tough investment. Like if I wanted to actually create a beach on the west side, which could be done, I would probably have to create an offshore barrier island to do that. And so that comes with a massive investment, like say $4 million. And so we're looking at something that happens on the east side, in part because it's shallower and the less frequent waves, and it's able to survive more readily in that location. That's
One more everyday request, can you show on the screen where in that space we are doing, we're proposing the cobble beach, so that way the reference know where the waves are compared to where the cobble beach is?
yes, just that.
The middle.
Well, overlay this here. Winds come from this direction most of the time. Occasionally they come from that direction. Right? See this angle right there? Oh, this is really hard. Sorry. Right like that. So we're protecting it in part by the investment of Pier. Because if I did something that were like if I'd have to get a wave and something like that's coming in this direction, which doesn't really exist. That's just gonna, so that's why we're doing that, and that's why it's there, is because from a coastal perspective, that's kind of a technical dealio. Yep. Okay, so beyond tonight, where do we head? So implementation. Sean talked about, excuse me, Sean talked about the capital improvement plan. There's funds that can help advance this. We're talking with the city about this. The city is very good at getting outside resources and funds to move forward with a project like this. This is the end of this initial process and the beginning potentially of another process where you all should stay involved, and you will have, is that pink, purple polka dot, is the stair goes all the way through there? Are we going to take out all the trees, or are we not going to? Like, that's all detailed design decisions, but we're getting the framework that works. And so you're going to move through what's called design development. It's basically, let's say, 50%-ish plans. It's what you submit for permit drawings to regulatory agencies, Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Natural Resources, all those fun things. I won't even get into leases, which I refer to here, because that's just goofy, and we don't need to talk about that tonight. But the idea is that you have to get from basically what we would call a plan tonight, from 0 to 50%, so that you can submit it for permits. And then you got to finish the design and engineering and go out to bid and hopefully get a good bid from a contractor who can actually do it in a reasonable time frame, unlike, say, Bradstreet's Landing, if any of you were there. Okay, that was painful for everybody. So as this moves forward, the question that I ask, and there's stickies that are started down here, the question we asked is, what questions do you have? I mean, other than the, hey, I don't really like this aspects of the concept, that's fine. You can tell us that. That's great. But what I'd be curious about is, as we move forward to implementation, things that we aren't thinking about, or what should we do with shade? How much shade is appropriate? Should we keeping all those trees and sort of the stuff that moves us forward? Like, we could kibitz about, like, let's go back to concept 2A, right? That's not where we are. We've kind of gone to, like, this is the general idea. So do you want to add a staircase that goes all the way down? Yep, that's cool. Let's talk about that type of stuff. You know, I think other details we could talk through, and, you know, that's kind of the end of the formal piece. But what we were hoping to do is just get everybody to hear the same thing in a roundabout way, and then give you guys an opportunity to talk with our team on a one-to-one basis, which many of you have done. And So I guess the only other thing I would say is that if you're comfortable with it, I was just going to open it up for like, if there's any big picture questions, like that seem applicable to like everybody versus like, I don't understand this. Like if you don't understand that, that's great. You can talk to me about it. If you want to talk about it now, we can, but just help me give sort of the big picture questions. If there's details, happy to talk with you and point things out and go back to slides. Like, I don't understand this wave thing. Like, we're cool with that. I do not. And I would assume that the city would actually probably sign it as not. Those are things that from a management strategy would be dealt with kind of as we move forward. But the idea is that I think we want to accommodate it, but it's happening right now, honestly. So the question is, if we're creating this sort of Cobble Beach area, and we're concerned about people putting their toes in the water, why are we even creating it? And the answer is, I think it's trying to find a balance, right? People are going to get there naturally right now. They do. They go over the top of the edge of the units. They got a little path down there. So it's accommodating, but I think the question comes down to, are we really trying to promote like swimming? No. But am I trying to promote toes in the water? Sure. Am I trying to give a place for people to actually pull out paddlecraft? Sure. I think the idea, as we all talked about at the previous meetings, was if I'm pulling a kayak, if I'm trying to get a canoe or a kayak here, I want to accommodate somebody, but they are a champion if they are pulling it all the way out here, right? And so like that's actually, I think that's great if they do that. But I think it's just an acknowledgement that people are going to do that, and we want to facilitate a safe way to do that. Is kind of what we're doing. And I don't know how to better describe that sort of management, that struggle we had, that tension of like, yeah, but that's the best I can probably describe it as. I don't know, Sean, if you have any. Sure. Yeah.
We walk this territory on a regular basis, and categorically, trees take so long to grow, and I would rather like to have trees we save
Yeah.
or preserve at all consideration. May have to take a few down, but I just don't want them knocked out.
Oh, and I think that's a,
Preserve as much as you can.
and I think that's I would say that's a very reasonable perspective. I will give you a contrary perspective on it, and it is not meant to be like belligerent or whatever. Trees shade in this environment everything that happens on that bluff. And what happens to trees shade what happens on the bluff and the vegetation that grows underneath it. That creates opportunities for erosion. So there's this balance. And so I think ultimately if there's trees that we can actually preserve that are limbed up high enough that actually promote or allow for vegetation underneath, I think it's a great idea. And people actually said in our previous meetings, shade's important. It gets hot down there. So actually I think you're probably right in that it takes a long time to grow a tree. So I think if you're gonna go around whacking trees miscellaneously, I think that's probably not the right choice. But I think it is, it's finding the right balance. And we didn't do a tree survey and look at condition and all that stuff, but that would be something that you'd want to do when you're moving forward. That makes total sense to me. Yeah.
One thing about the park now is the side is pretty much like this as far as being able to see everything from it. I mean, you can see people like in that path all kind of stacked up. So the fact that you're opening up the east side is good.
No, I think that,
And there's actually a lot of trees over there that block the rock cover. So they don't have a lot of options other than coming back.
yeah, there's I mean, people do actually use that edge for things that you want and some things you don't want. I can tell you, having worked east of here, that people use it for volleyball a lot. I've found 5 volleyballs. when I was down at the Gold Coast section. So, but yeah, it is. I think it's important to acknowledge that that bluff on the east side sort of does limit the views of downtown. So how can we enhance that? And I think we're striking that balance by providing some new amenities and activating that edge. Yeah. Lavender, magenta, whatever color we're going with.
So I can see that pier being super desirable place to be.
Yep.
So I was wondering, like, about how many people can that accommodate the size it is right now? And like, I know you said you haven't gotten into details, but do you anticipate like seating all along to access out to the wider part then?
So if I were guessing at things, but I'll give it my best interpretation. Seating is probably not all along the edge, right? It's probably underneath the canopy or more in the center, because people want to hang out on the perimeter. And so maybe there's a couple of benches that are towards the edge, but I'd probably say the seating's probably in the center. But that's a design detail that we can work through. In terms of capacity, I don't know how many people are here tonight. Let's see, you're 20, you're 40. Let's say 160. I bet you could hold that many people for a big event. For every...
You have that at your summer solstice. You're going to see people, you're going to see people crammed in all along, you know, the 19th through the 23rd. We have those prime viewings. I think at other times, can it hold that many? Yes. I think it's going to depend on weather, just like the steps, just like the rest of the park. 194,000 visitors a year at Lakewood Park. So it really depends how the software we hold it. So awesome. We have an amazing park that's getting a lot of visitors. It's a little difficult to say per day. A lot of it is also very weather dependent. So, but a max capacity.
Yeah, I'd say you're in a hundreds range.
So I guess I could envision it, and
Yeah.
I saw there is a rail along here.
There would have to be. Yep.
But almost like continuous seating, so that people could be, you know,
Sure.
that's like where you have the closest to the water.
Yeah.
And it would be really nice to accommodate as many people as you could sitting out there.
I think you could. I think there's ways to create pockets and nodes. What I think, anytime you create a pier or a structure like that, you want to think about: can 3 people, when I was 16 years old, 3 people my age at that time, make you feel uncomfortable going out there? And so, can we organize seating in places and spaces and movements to allow everybody to kind of feel comfortable moving out there versus like I can take the whole pier over just by having 4 people out there and, you know, playing some loud music. Like that's a balancing issue. But the other issue I would say is, you know, railings are a requirement, right? Anytime you're going to drop more than 4 feet onto a hard surface, you got to have a 42-inch guardrail. And so, if I now put a bench right on the edge, a 20-inch bench, that railing probably goes up from a liability perspective. So we have to think about the bench might want to hold back 3 feet or 4 feet. So you're looking out over the railing. So there's design ways to deal with it. But yeah, I think those are great thoughts, and I'd love for you to write down a comment specifically around seating and the need to talk about that in the next phase. I got one here, and then come to you, and then come back to you. Sorry, gentleman behind you. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things we heard from this entire process is that parking is going to be important, and it is right now. And I'll also say that success means that you're going to have days when it's uncomfortable to park. And the reality is you'll never have enough parking, and instead, unless we pave the entire thing. Now, that doesn't say that there shouldn't be more parking. And I think there's strategies that the city's exploring right now that would add, I think, 20 or 30 right now. And there's probably, is that right?
Yeah, right now it's 34 spaces now, but opportunities then to add more in the future when other amenities like this or others come online.
The other thing that we talked a lot about is that there's surge days, right? And there's days when you want buses and different things running, and there's got to be a different strategy to manage that. So I think there's a compensate management strategy that gets at your point, because you're right. It's a pain to park, but at the same time, I think we don't want to pave over everything. So it's finding that right balance, and I think that will be a continued discussion as the project moves forward. Like, my assumption is any investment along here is probably going to come with some some additional understanding of what's going to happen in the upland that isn't articulated in this plan right now. And so I think those are things that throw the sticky up there. We're well aware of it, and I'm sure the city understands it. So I think that's a good perspective. Go ahead here, and then I'm going to come back to here, and then I'm going to take one more, and then I'm going to have you guys mingle. So go ahead.
Just two things I've heard you all allude to that I'm curious to hear how they were considered in this design. Number one would be, does this plan, can you just talk about how you considered erosion in this? And I've seen the wave diagram, and I think I understand it as well as a moron could. But
No.
was that a big consideration in the plan? Is like, how can we preserve as much of this park as possible? And part two, which is completely unrelated, so I apologize.
Oh, that's fine.
Number of visitors to the park. I think Lakewood Park is uniquely situated to provide really good views of downtown Cleveland, and you kind of alluded to the amount of trees that are kind of hindering that. I think it'd be a great way for the city to take advantage of our number of great restaurants, our proximity to downtown. Let's encourage people from Westlake and Rocky River and Avon to come to Lakewood to take their prom pictures, eat dinner at our restaurant, and then go do something else. So if you could just speak about how either of those two considerations went into the plan.
First one.
The second one, if you want to
Yeah, I'll do first one. Shoreline protection exists throughout a majority of this, and so protecting and preserving that park is handled. I would say concrete, like stone, breaks down over time and has been in there for a long time. So you will probably have coming up some investment to do shore protection. Not anytime soon. It looked like it was in pretty good condition, but I think when you talk about erosion and you talk about wave climate, which is not, if you understand them at all, you're doing better than I did the first few times I looked at them, frankly, is the beach component was driven by that aspect and making sure that beach could actually sustain itself and be in existence. The other component of it is actually what I mentioned about the trees and the vegetation. Like, that bluff and the stability of the bluff itself is important, and the vegetation choices we make on that directly do have implications on the bluff itself. The toe is the toe. You're pretty much protected. It seemed, I haven't done a dive inspection. We haven't done that sort of level of analysis, but it seems like it's doing great. So that's good. The second part of your question was more about use, and I can't remember it, but Michelle said she'd take it, so I'm gonna let her go with it.
We're currently, as just kind of a fun side project, doing that correlation of understanding what is already happening now. Of basically, this we have already created as a space that we're gathering numbers on. It's 99% accurate. So that being said, we are then doing the correlation of your, kind of like the Madison district, your downtown Maine, Detroit is very long, so that one's a little bit tougher. So we are creating that correlation of understanding who went to either the park and then one of those business areas, or vice versa. Who went to the business area and then the park. We're working on it just because we're curious and it's cool data. We geek out over that kind of stuff. But I would agree that understanding then from a parking standpoint, the two contradictory things that we heard from a survey standpoint, and both of us were at every single public meeting. The biggest contradiction that we heard was, we need more parking, but I don't want to lose any more of our park. But we want more parking at the park, but we don't want to lose any more park. So unless we're going to build a giant structure garage, which I think that goes against the notion that we heard of what should be on Lakewood Park, that means then there is, if no one wants to lose any more parking other than, we found some creative ways to get these 34 spaces, but then you start going into parkland, and we heard that more so than needing more park. So how do we come up with policies and programs and management plans of busing, biking, walking, understanding? So some of this data that really is from an economic development driven standpoint will help us understand people's travel patterns, and will then help the city make decisions on, well, people are walking this way, The one bad thing about our data that we have is I can't tell what mode they're doing. So I can tell you that they went from the sushi place to here, because that's me a lot. But that doesn't mean that our software can tell me if I'm on foot, if I'm on bike, or if I'm driving. I personally leave my car where I can find that spot. It's usually halfway between, because then I'm splitting the difference. I unfortunately, because it's economic development software, I can't tell you that mode shift. But at least we can tell you where they're going, and we're getting there. So we're not gonna have it quite yet, but that is something that as we're thinking about those policies, those programs, those management ideas, we are providing the city with data just kind of as an extra thing to help people think in a different way.
Awesome, thank you. I would just throw into the ether any way to encourage people to walk or ride their bicycle or anything else. Always helps improve these things without necessarily paving more areas.
So regarding the mode shift, we have a parallel effort that's going on right now too. That's actually coming to a conclusion with City Council, where we've developed an active transportation plan to think about how do we get people, well, active transportation is walking, biking, running. How do we get people to connect to our parks, to our schools, to our downtown, our business districts? We have some really great starts. Lake Avenue bike trail or bike lane is a really good start. But the struggle we also have is those north-south connections through. And so we've spent a lot of time, another 18 months, studying those types of mode shifts and how we can get people that when we talk about Lakewood, it's the densest city in Ohio. It's a very walkable community. But how do we get people out of their cars and walking to amenities like this? Because it's not that far away. And leave the car at home. And then maybe we aren't talking as much about a parking problem at the park. So that's another parallel effort.
Most people said, I actually posted a parking thing again, and there's some great comments on the Lakewood community webpage, that if you want all the comments on it, you can see it right there.
Sure.
Several years ago, is everybody can walk. The problem is you got a baseball game, you got to carry
Yep.
your stuff,
Sure.
you got a
There's-
picnic, you got a bat, you got to carry your picnic stuff.
No, I get you.
There's
So-
people that can't, you know, they're.
Right, unable to do that for sure. Okay, so gray sweater, dark gray shirt, and then giddy up. All right.
My question was more to do with the efforts we have on the wildlife and any construction, we should kind of thinking about Bendy Park and prioritizing that I'm happy about what I know there's a lot that happens, a lot that happens along some of the couple beach and here, just curious kind of what studies or considerations you made for the water itself and then
Sure. I'll give you a couple answers to that. So, from there's a management piece to what you talked about, which is I'm going to say I love this park. Help me clean it. That's a you guys thing. And then there's what can we do to protect the resource. And so when we talk about the pier itself, Michelle's done a couple projects where the pier structure that's supporting it is actually a crib, which is basically like lattice work of wood, metal, steel, whatever. And it's filled with cobble. And that can actually create interstitial spaces in between the stone that can actually be beneficial for fish habitat. There's other strategies that you can do with the design itself of the improvements to actually enhance that. One of the things that I would say as an opportunity is the cobble beach itself can function in many ways. So in Euclid, in the open coast environment, if you've been to the Euclid section, there's actually vegetation at the back of that. And so like that's actually something that we can actually do here in some select areas as well and provide habitat that way. The other piece that I would argue is that our maintaining or allowing that land-water interface between like putting armor stone along the entire thing isn't good for people, great for erosion, and it's not really good for critters. It's not actually too bad because creating some structure on the shale lake bed is actually okay. But we can actually do with that cobble beach and then sort of the structure itself that's the pier, you can actually do some improvements to the pier itself and the design of that actually are kind of interesting. We're working on a project, and I'm not sure about the applicability here, where you've been to Chicago and the Riverwalk there? Right? So if you go down there, you don't know this, but on the piles underneath there, there's what's called hula skirts. And the piles, it's like a pile, right? And it's like a cloth, it's like a belt that my survey instructor had in college that is rope that's tied around and it has ropes hanging off, and it's creating structure on piles that actually can support aquatic vegetation. Well, actually not vegetation so much as a fish species and foraging. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that doesn't have to be like high cost. That could be sort of creative ways. We're doing this in Milwaukee Harbor right now on a couple projects. So there can be sustainable and ecological strategies to this. And I think at the base level, one of the things that Mark talked about when we were meeting on this is a landfill. Like, we actually can't like let stuff leach out into here. So we actually have to be mindful of that, which is actually why a lot of the improvements are kept off of that and we're hanging off the edge, because I don't want to impact the cap that exists. So I don't know, that kind of answers your question. The second half is a maintenance thing, really, and that's a you thing. Like, you can do it. All right.
So the green area to the eastern solstice steps, basically south of the main pathway, all of that, and then keep going around. Yeah. So right now, on the eastern end, there's a big cyclone fence.
Ah, right here.
Right. So what, is that going to be like natural vegetation? Is that going to be accessible 1 foot? I mean, are you going to keep it like wild? Not like perverse, like poison ivy, so it'll discourage people?
Sure.
And are you going to get rid of the cyclone fence and do something with that edge?
The fence is possibly replaced. I've not identified that it's being replaced on the plan. I think it serves an important purpose. Could you do something that's more aesthetically appealing? Yeah. But I would say that the fence is probably necessary and would be something I would want there. Unless you're going to start pulling back the top of the bluff, which you're not going to do because there's a landfill underneath. I would say there is a management component to that east side as it wraps the corner, which is everything from vegetation, because actually if you look at that edge, there's some erosion and rilling that's occurring, in part because there are trees along that edge that shouldn't be there because they're shading the bottom and that's eroding. And so there's actually some problems over there that are important to address. But I would say that's kind of beyond what we've looked at right now. But in general, I would say the idea with that green swath is that it is native vegetation that is probably supporting probably a number of grasses and forbs, so flowering pollinator species, whether that's monarch or whatever else that we're trying to support. That would probably be what we're looking at there, and probably changing that out over time. Because right now, if you go down there, and I have some great pictures of it, that are weeds taller than me, and a lot of grapevine, and some other things, right? And so I think it needs some love and attention, and I think that management strategy and that plan is probably something that needs to flow out of this, but is beyond where I'm at right now. But I think you're right in that you need to address that edge at some point. But the fence probably is necessary. All right, one more, and then I'm gonna run people back here. I am. Sure. I think it is an opportunity. I think I'm going to turn you all around and get you to go out there, but I would say, like, you should be proud of yourselves. Like, for one, turning out, and the amount of turnout and the feedback that we've received is tremendous, like way above the norm. So that's fabulous. And I know you people care about this place, and that's great. And that's exciting. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to kind of help you guys craft a vision and for our team to be able to do that. And I guess thanks for coming out tonight. Sean, any other comments or questions?
No. Again, Jason, thank you for you and your team, Michelle. Thank you to the city team, Mark, Amanda. Thank you to all of you for coming out. So appreciate it. We'll wrap up. If you have some more comments, you're welcome to provide them in the back, any questions you have. But otherwise, thanks. And there's still a couple hours left and some good weather. And it's dark out, but
If you
try and get out and enjoy it.
haven't signed in, that helps us for